We get an excellent remark from Martin regarding the royal family and sex. Hello, and welcome to the 29th installment of Frasier Fridays, where all the salads are tossed and all the eggs are scrambled. Today, we're looking at the 5th episode of Season 2, entitled Duke, We Hardly Knew Ye. This episode has production code 203, meaning chronologically it takes place before the prior two episodes. It premiered to 21 million viewers, right in line with the season's average ratings, but a decline of just over 2 million from last week's episode. This episode aired on October 18th, 1994, and will be the last to air in October before taking the next week off. Seinfeld has this week off, but will return for next week, while Friends airs new episodes both weeks. Speaking of Friends, the show had its first non-James Burrows directed episode this week and dropped to 18.6 million viewers, a drop of over a million viewers from the previous week and almost 2.5 million viewers less than Frasier, showing what a fluke it was for Friends to come out ahead during its pilot episode. Since he's off Friends this week, James Burrows had plenty of time to direct his third episode of Frasier for the season. On writing duties this week, we have the second script from the Doogie Howser producers Vic Rauseo and Linda Morris. This pair will write another 5 episodes of the series during this season and next season. I do think it's interesting to note that this pair's last episode, Travels with Martin, and this week's are both more Martin-centric episodes. It will be interesting to see if their other 5 episodes are as Martin-heavy showings as these two were. This week, we've got the Elevator and the Space Needle making its first appearance in Season 2, and its 8th appearance overall, tying it up with the red blinking dot as our most used intro so far. At this point, we've had a different intro for each episode so far in the season, and have seen all the intros used from the first season, except for the Nothing Happening intro. I suspect we'll either see that next week, or get a third new intro for this season. We open in the radio station this week with Frasier wrapping up his show, and Roz seemingly nowhere to be found. There's not a whole lot I want to touch on here, but before we get to the tie section, I want to call out Frasier's tie from this opening scene here. Though Frasier is never quite as put together as Niles, I find it interesting that his tie is straight up loose here. It's an odd look for him, as his tie is normally a bit tighter and snugged up to his neck. There's no reason for his tie to be pushed down so far here, so it's just one of those strange one-offs. We get some fun reactions to Roz eating celebratory chocolate-coated raisins, and her unbridled rage at the vending machine and disappointment over the raisins in it is just a ton of fun, and an all-around great Roz moment. It's not the highlight of the episode by any means, but I enjoyed it quite a bit, and anytime we get weird Roz antics, I am fully on board. Niles, who as of Season 2 very clearly does remember who Roz is all the time now, shows up to discuss a business venture with Frasier and witnesses Roz spitting the de-chocolified raisins out of her mouth. His reaction shot here is excellent and left me cracking up. As much as I love a lot of the reaction shots in this series, David Hyde Pierce has quickly become my favorite reactor, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. It turns out Niles stopped by to discuss a business venture with Frasier with a theoretical 10% yield on their investment, which is much better than, quote, that cozy 2% your bank is giving you. And oh boy, is that a dated reference. It's no secret the savings rate has jumped around a lot historically, and come down a lot over time. Interestingly, the rate would stay pretty consistent, around 2% for most of the 90s, up until around September 2001, when the 9/11 attacks caused major disruption to the world markets. There's actually an excellent 2021 short film about this called Freefall that I saw at a short film festival a few years ago. Anyway, post-2001, the interest rates began to climb again until the 2008 crash, after which time they've been more or less steady at well under 1%. The last few months, we have seen some climbs, and there's a few banks that will offer much better rates, but the average rate is still under 0.5%, which to me made the 2% line stick out like a sore thumb and feel very, very dated. In the next scene, we find Daphne all dolled up as she readies herself for a big date with a man she's been seeing named Derek. She asks the boys' opinions on two different scents she has, one called Heather and the other called Forbidden. From what I understand in later episodes, Daphne will actually wear Calvin Klein Obsession perfume, which is real. Unfortunately, based on my research, these two perfumes aren't ones that actually exist. There are a few brands named Forbidden, but all of them were created after this episode aired. And there's also a lot of scents that use the name Heather. This is because heather is a flower commonly found all over Scotland. Despite having no product placement here, my hat's off to both Morris and Roseo for knowing enough about perfume to make up these two fictional perfume names. We get an excellent remark from Martin regarding the royal family and sex. My initial thoughts on the royal family and sex is always the Prince Edward and Jeffrey Epstein story. Obviously, that's not what's being referenced here, but I do find it interesting that even nearly 30 years after this episode aired, we still have the same sort of things happening in the news regarding the royal family. In this case, the event that Martin is probably referring to is the affair that Prince Charles had while he was married to Princess Diana. With how much Martin talks about dukes as he gets ready to head out, I thought for sure we were going to get a rehash of Dinner at 8, the third episode of the first season, where the family went to the Timbermill restaurant and Niles and Frasier had their ties cut off. Fortunately, that's not at all what we're getting here. In fact, as it turns out, unlike the Timbermill, Duke's is a neighborhood cop bar. Niles and Frasier are in shock that their dad has invited them to go to his favorite bar with them since he's never done that before, and their looks of shock are delightful. After Martin leaves, the brothers sit on the couch and try to decide if they should go with their dad or if there is something else afoot. Daphne calls the brothers a couple of Wallies. This is a British term I wasn't familiar with, and it just means what a couple of knuckleheads. The term is generally affectionate and used for those who are usually smart but are making a silly mistake. We don't get that many British colloquialisms from Daphne, and it's nice to see one used here and used properly. This brings us to the title card where nobody knows their names. This is one of the most transparent Cheers references we've had thus far in the series. As I'm sure most of you know, the Gary Portnoy and Judy Hart Angelo song, Where Everybody Knows Your Name, is the theme song for Cheers, and remains so for the show's entire 11-year run. It's one of the most recognizable theme songs in the world, and even charted at number 83 on the US Billboard Hot 100. The only surprise here is it took Frasier this long to make a reference to it. With that said, a bar is the perfect place for the use of this title card, so I fully applaud them waiting until now to use it. As we get our first shot of Duke's, there's a few notable differences from Cheers. The first is there's a girly calendar on the wall behind the bar. Although I could have easily seen Sam having one of those, it's something we never saw, probably because Diane would not have approved of it. We also see more of that strange smoking on television, with several of the bar patrons lighting up cigars in the bar. Not only is this a strange occurrence due to the smoking on television thing we discussed several episodes ago, but it's also different and very dated because as of 2024, most states have banned smoking in restaurants and many in workplaces in general. The laws vary a lot from state to state, and unless I'm mistaken, there are currently 12 states in the US without any regulations regarding smoking indoors, but Washington is not one of them. In fact, as of 2013, Washington, and therefore all of Seattle, enacted a ban on smoking inside all workplaces, which includes restaurants and bars. This practice actually began with California in 1995, so just 1 year after this episode aired, and has since spread throughout most of the US. I'm not going to give my personal opinion on smoking in bars here, But given how many states it is illegal in, it can't help but feel incredibly dated to see it happening inside a bar here. Duke's is just packed with people, most of whom are Martin's ex-workmates. The first one we meet is Joe, played by Jack Wallace. Wallace is a "that guy who was in that thing" actor. He actually got his start in the 1974 Charles Bronson classic, Death Wish, and has since appeared in a number of well-known films, including Boogie Nights and State of Grace. On the television front, he's had two major recurring roles, both times as cops, once on Eagleheart and the other time on O'Hara. He's also appeared in a ton of one-off appearances from other shows, including Days of Our Lives, Law and Order, Designing Women, NYPD Blue, CSI, ER, 6 Feet Under, and Heroes. At the time of his death in 2020, he had just over 100 credited roles under his belt. Next, we're introduced to the titular Duke, played by John Lamoda. Although he wasn't near as prolific an actor as Wallace, he does have a more interesting career from my perspective. He got his start with an uncredited guest spot on the vampire soap opera Dark Shadows in 1969, before getting his first credited acting work in A Place Called Today in 1972. From there, he'd go on to appear in 3 episodes of Barney Miller, an episode of Knight Rider, Benson, Hill Street Blues, Cagney and Lacey, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Northern Exposure, Carolyn in the City, a second episode of Frasier, in Season 5, where he will play the same character, and a whopping 40 episodes of Alf, where he played Trevor Ochmanek. He passed in 2014 at the age of 75. The only other credited guest star this week is Bill Grafton, playing the part of Leo. Grafton's part is blink and you miss it, and the transcript I used for this actually incorrectly credits his line to Wallace's Joe. Grafton's face is never fully seen here, and his only line is, "Hey, this is Marty's kid, the guy on the radio." Grafton was active in the acting community, starting in 1975 with an appearance in the Oscar-winning film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, until 2004. During that time, he appeared in Benson, General Hospital, The Golden Girls, Cheers, where he played Justice of the Peace No. 2, Wings, Seinfeld, Blast from the Past, 3 episodes of Days of Our Lives, and 3 episodes of Frasier. He'll reprise this role again later this season, and in the very same Season 5 episode where Duke returns. It's revealed the bar is being shut down to build a mini-mall by Meadowwood Properties, the company Frasier and Niles invested in, making them partially responsible that Duke's is closing. The interesting thing here is there actually is a Meadowwood Properties investment company that was active at the time of this episode's airing. Granted, the real Meadowwoods is a Florida company that only holds a Florida state real estate license. Given how many people have vacation/winter homes in Florida, I have to wonder if one of the writers had had dealings with Meadowwood and the name just stuck in the back of their heads at the time they were writing this episode. It's almost a blink and you miss it background event, but Ros buys both Crane Brothers coffee this week, and I'd say her and Niles have officially become friends. I like this a lot, as we've seen them interact enough times that Niles finally knows who she is, and given how close her and Frasier are, I'm excited to see a lot more of Ros and Niles interacting in the future. The two make quite a duo with a slight air of disdain between them at all times. And this scene left me wanting another Niles and Ros-centric storyline, like the episode where Frasier took a sick day. This scene also gives another interesting and not altogether surprising look at Ros's love life, where we learn she's cheated on her boyfriends in the past. Part of me wishes Frasier would give some reaction to this, as Lilith cheated on him, but given he met Ros under totally different circumstances, and he doesn't look at her very much as a sexual prospect, her cheating doesn't seem to upset him very much. We have another first in the title cards this week, where the title cards actually break the fourth wall. This is more or less the first time the show's broken the fourth wall. It arguably broke it during a Midwinter Night's Dream when Niles and Daphne were alone and the power went out, but this is even more blatant. This is a fun use of the title card, and I really liked it. Between this and the Cheers reference earlier, the writers were on fire with the title cards this week. This scene finds a sleepless Frasier wandering around his apartment, racked with guilt for his role in Duke's closing. While Frasier is sitting with Eddie, feeling guilty, we get a line from Martin that feels kind of contradictory given what we learned just 2 episodes earlier in The Matchmaker. Martin says he can't sleep because Eddie had left the bed. In The Matchmaker, Daphne says that Eddie was sleeping with her when the fire alarms went off, and the implication is this was a pretty normal thing. I like Eddie sleeping with Martin more, as I think that makes a lot more sense, but it's still kind of a weird contradiction and something I wish the editors would have caught. One other thing I want to point out from this scene is just a set piece that Frasier will actually comment on before the scene is over. But Martin's bedhead is just excellent here. Martin pretty much always looks put together when we've seen him, but that's just not the case here. Here he's totally disheveled, and it's wonderful. The fact it's so bad that Frasier comments on it only makes it funnier. As the episode winds down, it becomes strangely reminiscent of the Cheers finale, just on a smaller scale. As Martin and Frasier drink to Duke's on the final morning before it's to be demolished, the father and son share a nice moment between them, and it reminds me a heck of a lot of the end of this writing duo's prior episode, when Frasier and Martin had a deep conversation riding together in the RV while the other members of the family slept. If the Cheers vibes weren't bothering me before, the coda gives me even more Cheers vibes. In fact, it reminds me of several episodes of Cheers, where the gang would go over to one member of the cast house or another, and essentially have the bar there, complete with drinking and carrying on. Granted, these are Martin's friends, not Frasier's here, but the comparison is impossible not to make. We have a small goof here that's pretty interesting. Recently, I commented that the backdrop outside Frasier's apartment became very obviously fake upon the cast getting too close to it. In this case, the backdrop outside Duke's looks fine, right up until the wrecking ball comes through the wall. The wind created by the wrecking ball actually sends the entire backdrop fluttering, and it's very obvious what we're looking at. We have a boatload of ties this week. First with Frasier, who sports 3 ties. 2 are repeats. His first tie is showing up for the 3rd time, while the Thanksgiving tie is making its 6th appearance here. His new tie is a lot more complicated design than we usually get from Frasier, and might just be a representation of the changing tie trends and the time since the show premiered. If Frasier had interesting choices in ties this week, there's a lot more outside the normal going on with Niles. Niles sports 4 ties this week, and 3 of them are actually new. One of the new ones has abstract chickens on them. This is the first time either of the brothers have worn something with an animal on it, and I'm kind of shocked Niles is the one to do it. If I would have guessed any member of the Crane family wore a tie like this, I would have put my money on Martin. Even having 3 new ties this week to 1, Frasier is still ahead in the overall tie count at 33 to 32 different ties thus far in the series. I commented that last week's episode of Frasier felt more like a Cheers episode than a Frasier episode, just in how zany it was. This episode takes a much more somber note than the Flower Baby does, and feels much more grounded for it. That's not to say there's not some good laughs here, because there are. Particularly Martin's comments on the royal family, and the wrap-up of the Daphne's date storyline. There's a few odd inconsistencies with Frasier's character this week, given how much time he has spent in working-class bars and Cheers. One would expect him to be a bit more used to the clientele it attracts, especially given the title card before that scene, which is a direct reference to Frasier's old bar. There's not a lot of Eddie this week, but everyone else gets in some good jokes and good character moments. We have some more progression from Daphne's character, and learn some more about her love life. We also get to see some great growth on the Ros and Niles friendship front, which is a welcome change to their interactions from the past. If you ever feel like you're somewhere where nobody knows their name, just think of this 7.5 out of 10 episode of Frasier, and it should put a smile on your face.